Before we ask all presenters to come to the front, let's start with the final part of Marco Marchetti's presentation, because he was almost done with his presentation, but we had the chance to give him 3 questions at the end, and we start with this one. Good.
If I may ask 1 or 2 quick questions, short questions.
Yes. Yes.
One is the current JSC implementing act.
Sorry?
The current JSC, Joint Scientific Consultation Implementing Act.
Yes.
And I think a key concern behind this one, medical device, medicinal products, is capacities. Because in the end, developers should come up with good development programs, with good trials, with meaningful trials, with patient-relevant endpoint, with good PICOs, but they need advice, in particular in this early phase. And with 10 slots or whatever, we will not match this need. So GBA has more than 100 per year. So what is the perspective for advice capacities?
I mean, for sure, we need to increase the capacity. I mean, I don't expect that in the next year we are the capability to have, I mean, a full capacity of JCA is something that, I mean, we are experimenting. It's the first time that is happening in Europe. But for sure, I mean, there is really the awareness that we need to increase the capacity for JSC, both for pharmaceutical products, but also in particular for medical devices, because it's a quite less regulated process. So, I mean, I understand the concern. There is a working plan that is under the stakeholder network consultation, actually, and probably, I mean, the number that you mentioned come from this document that is under public, under consultation from the stakeholder. I mean, this is the estimation. I mean, we have foresee to update the possibility to update the working plan more often with respect to the annual deadline, but I mean, this is for sure. We need to increase. Actually, we are expecting also the results for the capacity building HTA tender. So there we need to train more than 400 assessor and co-assessor in different HTA body in Europe. So this is a system that is increasing. I mean, you are right. I mean, there is the concern respect to the number, because if you compare 10 or 15 or 20 respect to 100, it's quite different. It's quite different. Are quite different, the number.
Super, thank you. One additional question. I'm terrible, I know. One additional question. The methods guidances that are currently already being published, in the end, they apply to both medical devices and medicinal products. But yes, there is considerable, let's say, difference in the current status of evidence-based medicine in the 2 fields. So what is this? What is your comment on this one?
I mean, guidance and document, I mean, has been decided in the coordination group not to have separate guidance or document for medical device and pharma product, but you need to intend this guidance reference document. So, I mean, they are, I mean, describing, I mean, I can say you, I mean, the document of the direct and indirect comparison is not fixing, for example, some threshold. You just explain what is the level of the uncertainty according to the type of clinical study that you are performing. So it's not fixing really any specific threshold. So it doesn't mean that I mean, the concept is, I mean, I was asked many times this question. So, so the concept is, I mean, if you have a really innovative product, you cannot do differently. I mean, we are completely agree. So, but I mean, the issue is that can we do something different? So, in the document of the direct and indirect comparison, this is described how is the level of the uncertainty that you have in getting decision. That you can accept this level of uncertainties. You have really. If you are really in those situations that you are not able to manage differently the clinical study. So, but if not, I mean, we need to, I mean, to really, for a transparent reason, because we need to increase the level of the system that you can do differently. Why you didn't do so? Now, what is the reason? Because I need to accept this uncertainty. So this is an increasing process, and really, I'm aware that probably for products that are arriving in the last miles of their clinical study, there is more difficult in changing the clinical plan, in obtaining more data, etc. So, we are in implementing process, even if we are going into the operation in a couple of months. But I think that we need at least 1 year, 1 year and a half to go. In the right with the right speed.
Yeah. Perhaps one very last question. I promise the last question. At the convention, we will have an intensive discussion also on the PICO schemes and on the indirect comparison. And current estimates are that about 50 to 70% of scientific questions will have to be answered with indirect evidence. Now, we also know that in particular, HTA bodies are very concerned with the reliability and the statistical properties of indirect comparisons. So how to approach this challenge that we have a multiplicity of PICOs, but a low level of acceptance of the ITCs?
It's $1 billion questions. I don't have an answer that can be valid for every situation. I told you before. It depends what we are looking. It's in many occasions you can have. No other way to go if with the indirect comparison. In other situations, no. So we need to be realistic and pragmatic. So if there is I know for the, as I mentioned you, for the product that is in the last final stage of the development, the clinical study, this could be really difficult. But for future process, you mentioned me, scientific consultation. So scientific consultation, we need to look this as like an improvement process. So we need to check what are really the possibilities that we have to set the right comparator. Also, we can say that many indirect comparisons have really a high level of uncertainty. So it's like to have a coin is which side of the coin. So it's really difficult in some situations that for an indirect comparison you are acceptable. Level of uncertainty. So then I can say yes anyway, but in terms of but member states need to be aware that I'm going to evaluate a product in which I don't really know what is the real effect. This is the scope of the relative effectiveness. So I don't know, because the level of uncertainty is so high.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marco, for taking the time that late in the day. So, and a good meeting also for you in the heads of agency group and so on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Now we switch to the discussion over here, and I ask all the presenters to come in front, and Stefano and Fabrizio to come over to present. And the online people, please put down your questions. I will hand the computer to Fabrizio so that he can read and bring in your questions.
Okay, questions, finally. From the audience, we have some questions from those people connected by remote. I would give priority to the people in the room, of course, if questions are from. Thank you very much.
I have even several questions, but maybe not everyone knows me. My name is Antje Bering. I was working for the GBA the last decade, but now I changed from the GBA to a different employee. But I have a question. First, I would like to ask you, François. You said you would not like to have exotic picos, so something like this. But isn't this of interest also for patients to see the answer? This is a question a member state had, and there is no evidence. So I don't think that every member state always needs evidence, proof of evidence for everything, but it's a relevant question they like to get answered. And in the end, there is no evidence in comparison to this. And you say just, I don't take care of this answer.
Thank you for the question, and I don't think I said I don't care. Well, first, I think the situation we are in is the legacy of the past, where all our healthcare systems did not communicate, and different member states adopted different decisions, so standard of care varies. It shouldn't be so, and now it's time to, with European guidelines, to really change so that all patients, wherever they live, can be treated based on evidence, not based on the legacy of decisions that were made in the past, where different treatments were rejected in a country and other treatments were approved in other countries. I think this also has to change. But what I was saying is that we can understand some questions are relevant, but then where would be the evidence? And for some very specific situations, we won't have the information on time for the initial HTA report. And this is, I think, missing in the regulation. What evidence can be or should be generated after the initial report, and how precisely to respond to some other PICOs for which, even with indirect comparisons, no quality analysis can be made in the first place.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have just a short comment question to Nathalie about the industry perspective. And if I understood correctly, you said that one of the issues is resources, because obviously in order to participate for this project of JCA, you need the time, you need economic support, and so and so. But maybe you don't take into account that in principle, if JCA is going to work correctly, you save a lot of resources nation by nation. Because today, I take the IFA example. Today, in the dossier for pricing and reimbursement dossier, the Italian affiliate of Sanofi has to put a lot of resources in order to write the dossier. If JCA will be taken into account correctly, probably IFA would save time, and also the Italian Sanofi affiliates would save resources, because in principle, the clinical component of the dossier has been already done, more or less, obviously. It would depend how much they will take into account, but in principle, it's a good point for the industry perspective. You don't think so? Or?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think there are 2 points about resources. My concluding remark was clearly on resources at local HT agencies. So that was really more the concern that on the short term, there is not enough resources for GSC and also to take care of the product that are not impacted by GSC. Then on the resources at internal level, we of course discuss about that. It may be the case in the long term. What we discussed with our Italian affiliate, by the way, this week, was that probably the resources will be displayed. So they will have to work much earlier. For instance, at the time of 2 years before the EMA submission, it's not always the case that we have one dedicated person in charge of the product at affiliate level. So that means that for them, maybe they will have more resources in the long term, let's imagine for the national dossier, but they will keep these resources to be involved earlier and to get their feedback on PICO and things like that. So it's maybe more, not so simple, yeah.
I make one comment to this exactly. Thank you for this question. And I think the most important part is that the reuse of the work for the EU HTA is so important that you are transparent as possible. Because only if you are transparent in the very beginning, then also the national HTA bodies can reuse what all the work was done before. And it's very difficult if there's a blackout or anything is blackened in the publication, then as I can say, for Germany, we could not use exactly these data. It was just a comment.
Yes, please.
So my name is Stefan Lange. I worked for about 20 years for IQWIC, like Antje, on the other side of the ocean. Now I'm working for a consultancy. I have a question to Elias. You said that still the gold standard, even in oncology, is the RCT. So I don't know whether I'm wrong, but I have heard about estimates of about 20–30% of the approvals in oncology are based on single-arm trials. So I wouldn't say this is an exception, but rather a rule. But this is, maybe I'm wrong. But my specific question is, you said, and I totally support this, one prerequisite is that we have good data on the natural cause of disease or good data on historical controls. But to be honest, I cannot remember any EPAR where such data were provided. So I would be happy if you could, in your approvals, in your documentation of the approvals, could provide the public with such data on the historical controls on the natural cause of disease. It would help me so much.
Mira.
Does it work? Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, so for the historical control, it's true that we have to rely also on what is available for a specific condition. And I think one of the issues that we face, especially in oncology, is that many of the recent developments were in targeted biomarkers for which there is very little information. So we have to rely on what has been published from institution exploratory data. So it is a challenge, indeed, it is a challenge. So, but we have to rely on what exists, even if it's limited in some instances, and it's often in the case of the most recent targeted biomarker oncology products.
Mira.
Hello, yes, Mira Pavlovich, I had a similar concern to Stefan's with regards to uncontrolled trials in oncology, when you said that EMA would prefer overall response rate and duration of response as the sign of activity of a drug. This is a little bit of a problem for HTAs who always want much harder endpoints, except in very exceptional situations where you have a very long evolution of a disease and you cannot wait for PFS or overall survival. So how do you think these completely different requirements for evidence could be managed, except in scientific advice?
Yeah, and also what I mentioned, in most of the cases, single-arm trials are supporting conditional marketing authorization. And the condition is often mostly to conduct a randomized controlled trial and to get hard endpoints, so PFS or OS. This is in the majority of the cases. But when we have single-arm trial, then we have all the criteria of conditional marketing authorization that have to be fulfilled, the unmet medical need, and the fact that the company will be able to provide comprehensive data and so on. So there are a number of criteria that have to be fulfilled. But yes, when we see a product in conditions where there is an unmet medical need and which shows a certain level of activity that could establish a positive benefit risk, then yes, we accept those data.
Thank you. I have an additional comment, which is that a couple of years ago with Stefan Tirstrup, that you know very well, we have done a survey asking HTA bodies in Europe if they make any difference between conditional approval, exceptional circumstances, and normal approval. So they said, no, we don't. If there is no enough data, there is no enough data, we shall not reimburse. The problem is still there for reimbursement.
Yeah, I cannot comment on that.
I believe there is a misunderstanding because the objective of regulator is to identify the direction of the benefit risk, while the objective of HTA is to quantify in that direction. And of course, it's much easier with limited data to identify the direction. If you have a single arm with a large benefit, as you said, we accept under large benefit, you have good reason to believe it's going in the right direction and accept. But if you want to understand how much better it is, you want to quantify the benefit risk versus another product, then you need very accurate data to do it. And this is all the difference. You said in your presentation that you suggested that it's transitive. What worked for HTA worked for regulator and vice versa, almost. You say something like that. That the same evidence may work for both. My belief is that what worked for regulator may or may not work for HTA, and what worked for HTA will very likely be sufficient for regulator. And this is the point we're interested in that discussion.
And I want to clarify, I think that's the point you made, that the data that will be needed for HTA will probably be sufficient to establish a positive benefit risk for regulators. The other way around, yeah, we know that it's not the case, obviously. Yeah. But I confirm that's my understanding.
This issue has been recently raised when the draft or the guideline about the JSC has been drafted. There is this interaction between EMA and the coordination group or subgroup, leading to a final meeting, and issuing two different deliverables, the letter from CHMP and the statement from the subgroup, sub-coordination group. So how different can be the two statements? Which is the acceptable difference? So it is something maintaining a certain degree of uncertainty about how parallel are the two processes, and the final decision, the final statement will be different or not. I guess this is an issue not only in the JCC, but also in the final JCA to be clarified. And I guess experience will solve the problem, because it is difficult to write on the paper something and then not to be evaluated in the practice.
Yeah, sorry, I had a question for you. In the GCA Implementing Act, there is this comment that EMA should inform the Secretariat in case of substantial issue or outstanding questions on the targeted proposed indication by the company. And I was wondering if you could comment from your experience, what does this mean? What could be an example of substantial issue on the indication, for example?
Yeah, this is an important point that is being discussed on the level of information, what kind of information need to be exchanged between EMA and the HTA. And there are considerations about, for example, major objections on the efficacy. As you know, there are steps with list of questions, list of outstanding issues. And yeah, that would be one of the major points on when you have a major objection on benefit risk or on efficacy. but we also still have to do some sort of assessment based on past examples of what kind of, whether those major objections had an impact in the end on the indication or not. So I think we have to be careful in the way we select those elements that will have an impact eventually on the indication, because we don't want also to send the wrong message. If, for example, at the first stage of assessment of a procedure, there is a major objection on the indication that has been proposed, that doesn't mean that it will not be approved in the end. So we don't want also to send the wrong message that this is not that it won't be the indication for which the benefit risk will be eventually considered positive. But this is under discussion right now, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Keith Abrams, University of Warwick, UK, and also NICE committee member. I just wanted to pick up on some comments that François and Nathalie said about the number of PICOs. And I can understand why people might want to reduce the number or keep the number down. But isn't one of the problems with that is that you increase population heterogeneity. In terms, essentially, you're having a larger network, and therefore with studies that might have differences in their populations and comparators, and therefore you need to adjust for those. And one of the problems is that if you start doing lots of indirect treatment comparisons, it means that you can't make any comparisons between them because you're adjusting out any differences in the population. But at the same time, you're increasing the amount of data, so that might be a positive. But there are methods for if you like, doing things simultaneously. I suppose I'm thinking of multi-level network meta-regression or NMA with baseline risk adjustment. But one of the problems with those is, as I think you both mentioned, about people's confidence in the methods. And if you're using very complex methods, does that impact on the transparency of what's been done? So I suppose the question is, do you see a slight conflict between trying to keep the number of PICOs down, but also making them more interpretable and understandable?
Sorry. I think we talk about the uncertainty and the heterogeneity, I think, during the break. So I think just as a company, we are just concerned clearly about this exactly because of this point. And when we are talking with our statistician, they told us that not everything will be feasible, or it will make no sense also we can perform the analysis, but what is the meaning of this analyzing? And also our fear is that, again, I come back to my presentation about what will be in the public domain. I think it's not that we do not want to disclose all the information, but it's also depend who will read the information and who is in capacity to understand this information, so that there is no bad interpretation. Because, of course, for instance, I used to work a lot in vaccine. You can send very bad signal very easily, and we want to avoid that, for instance.
I take the opportunity, talking about PICOs, to report a question from the audience by remote saying, I summarize, pulling together two questions. Is the reduction in the PICO numbers limiting the acceptance of the country payers for JCA? So because there are not those PICO, I prefer, I do not accept HTA, centralized HTA. There is a similar risk in your opinion?
Well, I wanted to complete the first response and maybe come back to your point. I think, and we are talking about new active substances, so substances for which very limited data are available at the time of the marketing authorization. Ideally, the discussion on PICOs should start with a joint scientific consultations to identify early different dominant picos that could be requested. It would be better to guide the development from there rather than trying to make complex analysis with the limited data set that we have, except that with 10 scientific consultations per year, that will not fly. So we really need to reorganize completely the structure of this cooperation to increase much more the number of scientific consultations that can be made. For example, the financial rules of the EU prevent the Commission to charge for these scientific consultations, and only an agency could do that. So that's the first point. But secondly, I think, yes, there is a risk in the regulation for member states that are not satisfied and who don't have the sets of parameters they need for their own decision-making. Then that's the exception when they can ask for additional information to the developer, meaning a national procedure and not a centralized one. I think that's a serious risk that exists, and which the regulation has some provisions which can represent a danger for the success of its implementation.
And this leads me to think about the need to measure the level of success, of acceptance of HTA in order to change something not completely right. And one of those measures is the level of acceptance of the centralized, the JCA from the country payers.
May I? Hello, my name is Stefanie Rosenfeld, working with Bayer. My question addresses the representatives of the medical societies and also the patient organizations. You all showed very impressively how much input is required and needed from clinical societies and patient societies, both on a European level and national level. And the backwards and forwards seems quite complex to me. So how do you feel? Do you have enough time for this alignment and for bringing all those experts and patients together? Because the timelines are quite stretched, and I feel that a lot might be lost on the way backwards and forwards.
Thank you. If you allow me to go first. To some extent, it's a bit of a relief that for us in hematology, that the number of submissions in ATMPs for the coming year are expected to be relatively low still. So it gives us a little, room for kind of figuring this out. As you can imagine, if a large number of joint HTA submissions would come our way in a short period of time, we would have to invest in capacity. Now we are, we're associations, so we're an association that's been growing pretty quickly. So just there's a limit to how many people we can hire. That to start with. And then there is also the question, what people do we need for this? I think we are relatively well set up through our multi-year experience working with EMA and UNETA to help with expert identification and recruitment. We are beginning to develop, say, basic awareness to slightly more advanced education for our members on HTA. But yeah, so the feeling at the moment is that there will be a little room still to kind of, get this right as we are going. But it definitely is difficult to know exactly what is coming our way. I think as Bernhard remarked at the end of his presentation, so EHA has been part of these discussions from the very start. which gives us a bit of an advantage. I see that colleagues from other societies are, looking with curiosity at, how we are faring. But we are definitely encouraging others to get involved. Ironically, maybe I sometimes have the feeling that some patient organizations are more ready for this because they more often have people like François, who are both very experienced in interacting with policy and regulatory processes, and have built up the expertise. But I don't know, François, if you agree with me.
Well, there are certainly training programs for patient advocates on HTA, but also on regulatory affairs, on clinical development. Yet we know when the GCA will start, most of the time we will find patients who never benefited from any training, who have no idea what HTA is. So that's why we developed a short module. What they need to know is what exactly is expected from me, and not by sending a document, read this and be smart and have smart questions. No, we need to mentor them, to explain them what the process is about and how they can contribute, help them navigate in the documents, but they also need to be part for the joint scientific consultations. There are meetings before the meeting with the company. They have to join, to be engaged in this discussion so that they are ready when there is a meeting, and probably same for assessments. But it really literally means taking the people by the hand in these procedures they never heard about before.
Intela.
Thank you. Intela Zozzi, Catholic University of Rome. I agree with you on what you say, the two pathways in parallel between scientific advice, EMA parallel, regulatory, and HTA. And I have a question from EMA colleague here. Thinking of this two, based on the implementing act on joint scientific consultations, and this two process, if the industry is involved in this on the scientific advice and in parallel if they want joint scientific consultation. I'm just wondering this parallelism, in order to optimize the process of, this is, honestly, it's always a scientific advice, and generally the criteria of scientific advice are versus the orphan, rare disease, or priority medicines. So do we have, in the future, maybe to optimize this pathway? Doesn't make sense not to have separate. I know that benefit risk profile, it's the aim of the EMA, but I think that in a rare disease, the questions that we have in the drug development to discuss with the industry is to pre-plan the trials and to support maybe a single-arm trials with real-world data or registries. And we are aware on EMA that you are doing a very important work on this, on data and big data and so on. So I tried this a little bit, not the best, or in terms of optimizations, given that we are trying to accelerate process, with the new regulations in HTA.
Are you differentiating because scientific advice is there?
No, not scientific advice. I'm referring to joint scientific consultations. So the Implementing Act is referring that industry can request to EMA scientific advice and in parallel, if they want a joint scientific consultation, to HTA. So do you discuss this, maybe to optimize this pathway in parallel?
Are you meaning that there? I'm not sure I understand your question, because yeah, definitely there is this pathway of parallel HTA, joint scientific consultation, and scientific advice. But my understanding is that in the proposal, the same data should be submitted to both.
Exactly, yeah.
It should follow the same timelines. are you referring to like a
Yeah, because there is a lot of burden, administrative burden, no? So EMA has to send all the documents to the HTA, and also the Secretariat of HTA has to send all the documentations to EMA. So I'm just wondering, no, if this help in the future, this collaborations in terms to optimize the system.
Yeah, well, I can understand that this is
because the questions are more or less the same, no?
I know, so I have to admit that I'm not involved in the discussion of joint scientific consultation and scientific advice, so I'm not going to be able to address your question specifically, but yeah, I understand that there are two different secretariats. That's also one of the challenges. You have two different entities with different ways of working, different interactions. So I think that it comes from there, the main issue. Now, whether in the future there could be ways of streamlining, also from an administrative perspective, it's certainly something that will be on the table. But for now, we have to start from two existing entities and two different secretariats.
Yes, in the implementing act, in the draft of the implementing act, it is a document of 13 pages. The word parallel is mentioned 24 times. So in order to give the flavor about the two processes will be in parallel, but converging at the end in the unique meeting, but going to produce two different deliverables. It is something. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. James Ryan from AstraZeneca. Bernhard, notice that you haven't spoken, so I've got a couple of questions for you. So the first was you talked around the MCBS scale at ESMO. I mean, legally that can't be used within the JCA itself because it ranks outcomes or weights different outcomes and provides essentially an end rating. But I'm just wondering how you would see the use of the MCBS maybe as part of that national survey on the PICOs. And then the second question is, how aligned do you think national clinical guidelines are to European clinical guidelines, and where might you see variation in that?
Well, I think we just have to accept that there are three different issues at hand. Approval, HA assessment, different from clinical benefit, and it just can add a different aspect. But I certainly learned in Germany that the GBA looks very much as the MCBS and not to completely deviate from that. So at least they know that they're not completely on the wrong track by whatever different methodology had been proposed by HTA. So I think it's quite a corrective, I think. No, it can't be the same result completely because the endpoints, for example, have a different weight for a clinician and then for HTA. So I would accept that. The second question was? That's a major point which we discuss in our guidelines. The problem with European guidelines is they tend to take this lowest common denominator. So if there is no MRI in Bulgaria, there is no PET-CT in Latvia, then they won't put it into the guidelines, which is a problem. So the guidelines tend to have the lowest common denominator, whereas on the European level, we try to have the best available treatment for the patients. There is a discrepancy, and we discuss it among ourselves and try to find some solution about that. EHA has discussed it very extensively. We would come to the second option and really in the guidelines get the best potential treatment and the best potential diagnostic and just ask everybody to achieve that goal, even if the standard currently will not be there. I think that's our goal as a clinician. I think we cannot go from that.
Last question, or one of the last questions.
Yes, Martin Danner from the German Umbrella Organization of Patients Organizations. I've got another question for Bernhard Wörmann. You said that it's an idea of the past just to involve one expert in HTA and that we have to build up networks of experts. And this is a very hard challenge to build it up in a very quickly. So I'd like to ask if we shouldn't build up early warning systems already in the start of the EMA process to build up an alignment on the opinions of PICOs and so on, because I must say, from my point of view, it's the same for the patients. It's not a good idea to involve just one patient in the HTA process, which should know all the situations of all the patients all over Europe. It's not a realistic point of view, so we will have to build up also our networks of patients and to build it up very early. Maybe we should together build up an early warning system to create these networks.
Be very ready to do that, but still also an answer to your question first. I think it doesn't make sense to try to build up a network of experts for one specific ATMP procedure, which we want to comment on now with an approval. I think we have to build up these networks now, and I think the major benefit to have up-to-date guidelines. And then we can extract from that. And then we are used to discuss it among ourselves. We have a number of experts, and then we can probably come to a number of 5 to 10 who then do that specific procedure. But I think that's the only realistic way to do it.
Can I, Chairman, add one, I think, important comment on guidelines? One big challenge there is that, you know, with the rapid pace of innovation in some disease areas, it's hard to keep up with guidelines. Clinical practice guidelines are, it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time in accordance with rigid methodologies to develop them. And so in prioritizing which guidelines we are putting first will be developed or updated first. That is actually becoming increasingly difficult because also the more there is the expectation, and we're promoting that ourselves, but that the standard of care at European level is taken into account in all kinds of decision making at the regulatory HTA and access level. The more important it is that guidelines are being kept up to date. And sometimes the time involved with developing a guideline, actually takes too long. So that is an added level of complexity. Also, in the context of the question that we were asked first about, the amount of work and the investment and the readiness of both. Medical societies, but also patient organizations, because that's, we've also begun involving patients in guidelines development. So it's a really complex and multifaceted challenge.
Yeah. No, just to add, if you remember, Marchetti said about one of the next steps they are going to face is to put in place a conflict of interest. I mean, a guideline or implementing that. And this is strictly related to the involvement of experts or even patients, I presume. Yes, please.
Yeah, Anne-Pierre Picard, a patient advocate with the Acute Leukemia Advocates Network. And I'd like to comment back on your question and on François' response regarding patient organizations, like their stance with regards to the regulation. In France, I've heard patient organizations that know of HTA and then know of the EU HTA being quite despondent, saying, we don't have enough resources to do the work in 45 days max. And we don't always have 45 days at HAS to have, 2 weeks, and then we need to be member of an umbrella organization. Some of us need to speak English to be able to contribute. And some of them just said, you know what, forget about the assessment, we'll do the appraisal. We'll be there at the national level. So I'm not saying it happens all the time, but EURDIS is the best in class. So they're not, in the sense that you are really organized, and you have this strong, footprint at European level. It's not always the case for a lot of patient organizations. And I'm just being realistic. It doesn't mean it can't evolve. But I think EURDIS is probably one of the examples that most patient organizations look forward to. I mean, look at and think that, this is the goal. But how many of us speak English in France? I mean, no offense, we're getting better, but still, it's a challenge. Time and language skills, and then also expertise.
Yes, and well, we could discuss for hours on these important aspects, just to say that ideally, now that there are many sources of information we could use, we could extract automatically with artificial intelligence, just for the relevant patient organizations to be informed on what and how they need to prepare. We have the clinical trial information system, where we can extract the expected date of phase 3 clinical trials. And from there, we should be able to inform all relevant organizations. It's the right time to prepare, for example, define your unmet medical needs, or discuss which element of your life you want to be changed by a new treatment, to prepare to feed the discussions at EMA and in HT. I think there is a much better work we could do jointly to inform all patient organizations that need to be prepared and avoid the language barrier by sharing the written information they could collect from all their members in different languages. I think we are still at the beginning of discovering all the potential of these new technologies.
I agree there are resources, but then there is a sense of being despondent, like you're talking about AI. I mean, it's for a lot of patient organizations mastering AI and all that. I'm just saying I'm not saying we not get there, but I think we don't want to sort of picture a situation where all patient organizations are ready to go.
But at least we should pilot it and learn ourselves how to use these techniques to facilitate the...
Apologies if I created that impression that all patient organizations are ready capacity and resource-wise. I'm aware that that is not the case. On the contrary, actually what I meant, and I think that's an important part of the awareness, that all patient organizations are led by patient advocates who by definition understand, say, the policy and regulatory processes, and also, you know, all the decision-making processes that lead up to access better than most doctors, who, you know, with some exceptions. Are there many doctors who have that awareness? No, not the majority, for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all participants. I thank you for the attention. I leave the floor to Jörg for wrap-up.
Not a lot of wrap-up from my side. Also a big thank you, and I like the discussion. Patients should have the last word. So, no, they should. And it's all about patient care and improving patient care.